This is The Truth in a Nutshell, and I thank you for taking the time to come and be nourished by the Word of God. Looking at the state of the church today, one would think that God has somehow been exiled. Exile is prolonged, usually enforced absence from one's own country. A person banished or living away, rejection by means of an act of banishing or prescribing someone, forced to leave, forced to move out. Exile, or banishment, is nothing new. The custom or practice of exile has been around for thousands of years. And it may surprise some to learn that quite a large number of notable names have suffered the injustice of being banished or exiled. As far back as Seneca, the philosopher and statesman of the Roman Empire, to his contemporary Cicero, to more recent victims of exile such as John Calvin and Thomas Becket, whenever someone was a nuisance, whenever someone was a thorn in the side of the great majority, yet too visible to simply kill off, they were exiled. They were sent away, far from their homes. These men were forced to live out the rest of their days on some island or faraway nation, holding on to the fleeting hope that someday they might see their loved ones again. It was an easy solution to a difficult problem. One couldn't simply kill a spiritual leader, a general, a respected philosopher, but such men could by no means be allowed to upturn the apple cart, to be perpetual and proverbial flies in the ointment, stifling the plans of the ruling parties whenever the opportunity arose. No, something had to be done, and after what I assume was much trial and error, they happened upon the idea of exile, or banishment. As the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind. No matter how boorish, brazen, shameless, and audacious those of the past might have been in exiling those whom they feared and perhaps secretly envied, it was only recently that man has attempted the unprecedented. Man has attempted to exile God himself. As much as I try to find a different descriptive, another explanation or definition of what has happened in today's modern church, the only one that fits, the only one that makes sense, is that we have effectively and successfully exiled God. We have exiled and banished him from his own house, nonetheless. No, there was no need for forcible removal. God will not tarry where he is not welcome. God will not barge in and make himself at home if no one is willing to receive him. By our actions, active disobedience, and rejection of truth, we have succeeded in banishing God, relegating him to some far-flung corner of our consciousness where he can't interfere, where he can no longer rebuke sin, where he can no longer chastise and reprimand. He is there somewhere, but his presence has no bearing on our decisions, on our conduct, on our actions or our choices. Because we have exiled God. Because we are no longer subject to his authority, his will, his word, and his standard. The modern-day church can readily justify anything and everything as being right and true, as being of the light, when even the world can plainly see that it's engrossed in darkness. Sure, we still mention him from time to time when we want to rally the troops or take up an extra special bonus offering. Sure, we'll pronounce his name and twist his words to make them fit our own ideology, but other than these special occasions, when we can use the nostalgia of past glories to elicit the right response from the sheep, we prefer to keep him out of sight. He is too set in his ways, unwilling to bend or compromise, unwilling to be a bit more tolerant, to get along and play nice. So strict. But people don't respond to strict anymore. They like wiggle room. The shadows of the gray areas, the ambiguous interpretation that gives more leeway to sin. The modern Pharisees know what the people like, and they have no qualms about giving it to them. In their hearts, they thought if only they could phrase their requests just right, coming up with new feasts for which to open one's wallet and new gimmicks to part the sheep from their wool. If only they could make sacrifices and bring burnt offerings, God would overlook the sin. He would overlook the iniquity. He would overlook the bloodshed. If only there was enough money in the coffers when the exiled king returned, he would not care where it came from, or if those claiming to be of his house brought glory or shame to his name. In their all-consuming hunger for power and prestige, some even thought, if only in passing, that they could replace the exiled king, taking for themselves the glory that is rightfully his, reveling in the applause and the adulation, reaping the harvest of excess from the hands of the penitent, innocent, and faithful. With each passing year, the king found himself in exile. The parasite hirelings and duplicitous Pharisees grew bolder and bolder, making grander and grander promises to those who assembled before them. Promising them a home was no longer good enough. They needed palaces now. A car was for the servants. Now they needed an airplane. And so it went until the consequences of their initial action began catching up with them. You see, dear friend, you cannot turn your back on God and expect that there be no consequence. You cannot reject and attempt to banish him and expect that he will not punish the disobedience of sin. God is infinitely patient, and some took the patience to mean indifference. Zechariah 7:11 and 12 says, "But they refused to heed, shrugged their shoulders, and stopped their ears so that they could not hear. Yes, they made their hearts like flint, refusing to hear the law and the words which the Lord of hosts had sent by his Spirit through the former prophets. Thus great wrath came from the Lord of hosts." Now it seems these same wolves, these same Philistines and Pharisees who orchestrated and coordinated the attempted overthrow of the king, these same brazen men who wanted nothing to do with God for fear that the world, seeing them in a bad light, would tell them to go away. These men who, for fear of being associated with God, refuse to acknowledge him, don't know what to do. They've made their hearts like flint. They refuse to hear the words of the Lord, and they deny the most fundamental biblical truths. They compromise the most deeply held beliefs of the church. They flirted shamelessly with the world, and they embraced the world's advances. And now they wonder why the wrath of God is ready to be poured out. Did you think there would be no consequence? Did you believe you could exile the King of Kings forever? Even in the darkest hour, even though the king had been exiled, there were still those who remained faithful to him. Though he might not have been welcome in his own churches, he was still on the throne. And those who remained faithful kept their gaze firmly planted on the horizon for his return. The shock and dismay the world showed at the events taking place did not surprise the faithful or dismay them. They had read the king's letters to them, and they knew what to do and what to expect. They had been warned beforehand of the calamities and the wars and the rumors of wars, the famines and the plagues. They knew this would only be the beginning, and that far worse was on the horizon. No, it did not come as a shock. They were not despondent or dismayed. They did not react. They did not weep or murmur. They saw the events that were unfolding as a welcome relief, because they knew, they knew, just a little while longer and he would return. Yes, the king is coming. And he is coming for a bride that is without spot or wrinkle, a bride that is wise and righteous and true to him, a bride that is not ashamed of him, a bride whose faith has persevered. As always, may the Lord bless and keep you until next time. This has been the truth in a nutshell.